Title: The Disappearance of a Billionaire. Chapter 1: The Vanishing. Detective Miles Carter had seen it all. Murders staged as suicides, blackmail schemes turned deadly, and cases so twisted that even the city's most hardened criminals shuddered at their details. But nothing quite prepared him for the disappearance of Victor Holloway, a billionaire with enough power to make people vanish, not the other way around. It started with a phone call. "Detective Carter, we need you." The voice on the other end belonged to Evelyn Monroe, Holloway's personal assistant. She sounded composed, but there was an unmistakable tension beneath her words. "Victor Holloway is missing." Miles frowned, leaning back in his worn leather chair. A man like Holloway doesn't just disappear. Either he's hiding, or someone doesn't want him found. "That's why we need you," Evelyn insisted. "He hasn't been seen in 72 hours. No security footage. No calls. His house is untouched. His car is still in the driveway. He's just gone." Miles had dealt with missing persons cases before, but this felt different. Holloway wasn't just another rich man. He was a target. Powerful, ruthless, and with more enemies than friends, his disappearance could mean one of two things. Either he was dead, or someone wanted the world to think he was. "All right," Miles said, grabbing his coat. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Chapter 2: The Mansion of Secrets. Holloway's estate was a fortress. High gates, state-of-the-art security, and enough cameras to make a casino jealous. Yet somehow, its owner had disappeared without a trace. Evelyn met Miles at the front entrance, her sharp green eyes scanning him up and down. "You work alone, right?" "Most of the time. Too many partners slow me down." She nodded approvingly. "Then follow me." The inside of the mansion was cold, sterile, too perfect. It felt less like a home and more like a museum, a carefully curated display of wealth with no warmth behind it. "Where was he last seen?" Miles asked, studying the framed photos on the wall. Holloway shaking hands with politicians, standing beside world leaders, posing with celebrities. "His office, 2 nights ago," Evelyn replied. "I was the last one to speak with him. He had a meeting scheduled that night, but he never showed up. By morning, he was gone." Miles walked into the office, taking in the details: a mahogany desk, bookshelves lined with first editions, and a glass of whiskey sitting on a coaster, untouched. "Who was the meeting with?" Evelyn hesitated. "That's the problem. We don't know. He was secretive about it. Wouldn't even tell his security detail." Miles narrowed his eyes. Then whatever happened that night, he didn't want anyone knowing about it. A billionaire keeping secrets wasn't surprising. But a billionaire disappearing without a struggle? That was something else entirely. Chapter 3: The Hidden Room. Miles had been in enough crime scenes to know when something was off. The pristine condition of Holloway's office didn't sit right with him. No signs of struggle. No evidence of an intruder. Either the billionaire had left voluntarily, or whoever took him was so meticulous that they left no trace. Evelyn stood near the desk, her fingers gripping the edge as if she were bracing herself. "There's something else you should see." She led Miles to a large bookshelf that spanned the wall. Holloway was a paranoid man. He had panic rooms built into all his properties. "This one is supposed to be hidden." Miles raised an eyebrow. "And you're just now telling me this?" Evelyn exhaled. "I didn't think it mattered. Until I saw this." She pressed a small button on the side of the bookshelf. A low mechanical whir sounded as the shelf slid open, revealing a concealed doorway. Inside was a dimly lit panic room, except it wasn't empty. Miles stepped inside, taking in the scene. Papers were scattered across the desk, some torn, some covered in frantic writing. A security monitor displayed footage from various parts of the mansion, all showing nothing unusual. But what caught his attention was the single message scrawled across the whiteboard in deep red ink. "Trust no one." Evelyn inhaled sharply. "That wasn't there 2 nights ago." Miles felt a chill run down his spine. Then someone was here after Holloway disappeared. And they wanted us to see this. The question was it a warning? Or a trap? Chapter 4: A Shadow in the Dark. Miles stood in the dimly lit panic room, his eyes scanning the scrawled message once more. "Trust no one." The words felt more like an instruction than a warning. He turned to Evelyn, watching her carefully. "Who else has access to this room?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Only Holloway. And, maybe his head of security, Charles Ward. But Ward's been unreachable since the night Victor disappeared." Miles frowned. "Unreachable? His phone's been off. No one's seen him. And Holloway trusted him more than anyone." Miles took another look at the desk. Papers filled with names, bank accounts, offshore transactions. This wasn't just a billionaire's paranoia. This was a man keeping records of something dangerous. A soft creak echoed from outside the panic room. Both Miles and Evelyn froze. Miles instinctively reached for his gun, motioning for Evelyn to stay back. Slowly, he moved toward the hidden entrance, listening carefully. Another sound, closer this time. Footsteps. Then, a whisper. "Get out. Now." Miles yanked open the secret door, his weapon raised. But the hallway was empty. Evelyn's breath hitched. "Someone's watching us." Miles' jaw tightened. Then we're not alone in this house. The mansion had felt empty when they arrived. But now, Miles was certain. Someone else was here. Watching. Waiting. And they didn't want him getting any closer to the truth. Chapter 5. The Warning. Miles had been in dangerous situations before, but something about this felt different. The empty hallway where the voice had whispered was still and silent, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. But he knew better. Someone had been there. He turned back to Evelyn, who stood frozen at the doorway of the panic room. Her hands were clenched at her sides, her usually confident demeanor cracking. "We need to leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now." Miles didn't move. "Leaving won't solve anything. Whoever's here, whoever warned us, knows something. They wouldn't have spoken if they wanted us dead. They're trying to scare us off. And it's working," Evelyn shot back, her green eyes flashing. "If Victor was taken, we could be next." Miles glanced back down the hall, his detective instincts kicking in. The intruder could have killed them both right then and there. Instead, they left a warning. That meant they wanted them to find something, just not too much, not yet. "I need to check the security footage," he said. Holloway's panic room had a direct feed to every camera in this house. If someone was here, they'll be on the recordings. Evelyn hesitated but nodded. "The security room is in the basement. I can show you the way." They moved carefully through the mansion, every shadow feeling like a potential threat. The air was thick with tension, the silence pressing in around them like an invisible force. When they finally reached the security room, Miles found himself exhaling in relief, only for that relief to be shattered as soon as he saw the monitors. The screens had been wiped. Every single one showed static, as if someone had manually erased the footage. "Damn it," Miles muttered, running a hand through his hair. "They knew we'd come here." Evelyn hugged herself. "What now? If they wiped the footage, it means they have complete control over this house." Miles' mind was already racing. Not necessarily. They wiped the system, but there's always a backup. Security firms like Holloway's don't rely on a single data source. There has to be another way to access the files. Evelyn looked up. Holloway had an off-site storage facility downtown. His private servers. He kept sensitive data there. Financial records, business deals, and, I assume, security footage. Miles nodded. "Then that's our next stop. But we need to be careful. If whoever's watching us doesn't want us seeing this footage, they'll do whatever it takes to stop us." Evelyn shuddered. "I'm beginning to think Victor didn't just disappear. Someone wanted him gone permanently." Miles didn't respond. He was already thinking the same thing. As they turned to leave the security room, a faint noise echoed through the basement, footsteps above them. They weren't alone. Again. Chapter 6. The Chase Begins. The footsteps above them were slow and deliberate, like someone wasn't in a hurry to hide. Miles placed a hand on Evelyn's shoulder, motioning for her to stay quiet. The basement lights flickered for a moment, and a faint creak echoed through the house. Someone was moving. Evelyn's breath hitched. "What do we do?" Miles glanced around, his mind racing. The basement had no direct exit except for the stairs leading up. They were cornered. If the intruder was armed, walking right into them could be suicide. He pulled Evelyn into the nearest storage closet, pressing a finger to his lips. The steps crept closer, pausing right outside the security room. Miles could hear faint breathing. Then, a quiet click. A gun being cocked. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, her nails digging into her palm. Miles reached for his own weapon, carefully flicking the safety off. He counted the seconds in his head. 1, 2, 3. Then, a loud crash, glass shattering upstairs. The intruders spun around, their heavy boots stomping toward the disturbance. Miles didn't waste a second. He slipped out of the closet, grabbed Evelyn's hand, and sprinted toward the stairs. The moment they reached the top, Miles slammed the basement door shut, locking it behind them. He barely had time to register the mess in the foyer, a broken window, a chair knocked over, before Evelyn yanked his sleeve. "We need to go. Now." "Agreed." Miles didn't waste time asking questions. Whoever had broken in was dangerous, and staying in the mansion was no longer an option. They rushed outside, the cold night air hitting them like a slap. Miles pulled out his car keys and unlocked his vehicle. They barely made it in before a gunshot rang out from inside the house. The bullet shattered one of the side mirrors, sending Evelyn into a panicked gasp. Miles floored the gas pedal, tires screeching as they sped off into the darkened streets. He didn't look back. He already knew what he would see. A shadowy figure standing at the entrance of Holloway's mansion, watching them leave. Chapter 7. The Safe House. They drove in silence for miles, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Evelyn clutched her arms, staring out the window, her mind clearly racing. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "Somewhere safe," Miles muttered, taking a sharp turn down a quiet road. "I have a contact, an old friend. He owns a private hideout outside the city. No one will find us there." Evelyn nodded, though she looked unconvinced. "And then what?" "We just hide." "No," Miles said, gripping the wheel. "We find out who's behind this. We get the security footage from Holloway's off-site storage and figure out what the hell is going on." Evelyn exhaled. "And if Holloway is dead?" Miles didn't answer right away. He had been asking himself the same question. If Holloway was gone, they weren't just dealing with a disappearance. They were dealing with a murder. And they might be next. Chapter 8. Breaking in. Miles drove through the deserted highway, eyes darting between the road and the rear-view mirror. No signs of pursuit, but he knew better than to let his guard down. Whoever had been in that mansion wasn't just watching, they were willing to kill to keep their secrets. "Tell me more about this off-site storage facility," he said, glancing at Evelyn. She took a deep breath, still shaken from the attack. "It's in an industrial district downtown. Holloway used it for sensitive business records. The servers are offline, meaning they aren't connected to any network. The only way to access them is physically." Miles clenched his jaw. That means whoever wiped the mansion's security footage couldn't have done it remotely. Someone had to go there and erase it themselves. Evelyn nodded. "Which means there's a chance they missed something." They drove in silence for the next hour, pulling into an empty lot in front of an unmarked warehouse. The building looked abandoned, but Miles knew better. Holloway was too paranoid to leave something this important unprotected. "Cameras. Alarms?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated. "Only at the main entrance. But there's a back door, Holloway's private access. I have the code." Miles smirked. "Then let's not waste time." They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Evelyn entered the code, and with a quiet beep, the door unlocked. They slipped inside, greeted by the hum of cooling fans. Rows of server racks stretched before them, blinking lights casting eerie reflections on the walls. "We need Holloway's personal drive," Evelyn whispered, leading him toward a secured cabinet. Miles scanned the room. Something felt off. "Be quick. We're not alone." Evelyn's fingers flew over the keyboard, searching for Holloway's latest files. "Almost there." A soft thud echoed from the entrance. Miles drew his gun, stepping between Evelyn and the noise. He could feel the tension in the air, a predator lurking just beyond sight. Then, a voice. "You really shouldn't be here." A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, a gun resting casually in his grip. Miles recognized him instantly. Charles Ward, Holloway's missing head of security. "Where's Holloway?" Miles demanded, keeping his weapon steady. Ward chuckled, shaking his head. "You think you want the answer to that, detective? Trust me, you don't." Evelyn stiffened. "You wiped the security footage. You were in the mansion." Ward smirked. "Not just me. There are bigger players in this game, sweetheart. And you're in over your head." Miles took a step forward. "I don't like games. Give me a reason not to drop you right now." Ward raised his hands in mock surrender. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to warn you. Walk away, Carter. Take Monroe and disappear. Whatever you think you're about to uncover, it's bigger than Holloway. Bigger than both of you." Evelyn's hands tightened into fists. "What did you do to him?" Ward's smirk faded. "I didn't do anything. But the people I work for, they don't leave loose ends." Miles felt the weight of the warning settle in. "If that's true, then you're a loose end too." Ward's jaw clenched. "Which is why I'm telling you, leave this alone before you end up like Holloway." Silence hung between them. Then, before Miles could react, Ward stepped back into the shadows. The sound of tires screeching outside signaled his escape. Miles exhaled sharply. "We need to move." Evelyn turned back to the screen. "I've got the files. Whatever Holloway was involved in, it's all here." Miles nodded. "Then let's find out what he was so desperate to hide." Because now, it wasn't just about finding Holloway. It was about surviving long enough to expose the truth. Chapter 9. The Truth Unveiled. Miles and Evelyn didn't waste another second. The moment Ward disappeared into the night, they sprinted to the car, shoving the hard drive into Miles' bag. Every second they stayed in that warehouse was a risk. "Where do we go now?" Evelyn asked, her voice laced with tension. Miles started the engine, eyes darting to the rear-view mirror. "Somewhere safe. I have a contact, an ex-hacker who owes me a favor. If anyone can crack into these files and keep us off the grid while we figure out our next move, it's him." Evelyn nodded, gripping her seatbelt tightly as Miles sped through the dark streets. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a dingy apartment building on the outskirts of town. Miles knocked twice on a rusted metal door before it swung open, revealing a man in his mid-40s with thick glasses and a permanent scowl. "Carter," the man muttered. "You sure know how to pick the worst times to show up." Miles smirked. "Nice to see you too, Felix. Got a job for you." Felix sighed, stepping aside to let them in. "You always do." The apartment was cluttered with outdated tech, glowing monitors, and a lingering smell of stale coffee. Evelyn looked around, visibly uncomfortable, but said nothing. Miles pulled out the hard drive and handed it to Felix. "We need to know what's on this. Fast." Felix raised an eyebrow. "And what do I get in return?" Miles leaned in. "Not getting arrested for that little hacking stunt you pulled last year." Felix sighed dramatically. "Fine. But if this gets me killed, I'm haunting you." He plugged the drive into his system, fingers flying across the keyboard. Minutes passed in tense silence before Felix let out a low whistle. "Okay, this is big," he muttered. "Financial records, offshore accounts, encrypted messages. But here's the kicker. Someone was paying Holloway off. Huge sums of money being funneled into his personal accounts." Evelyn frowned. "Who was paying him?" Felix's eyes darted across the screen. "It looks like a shell company, but if I trace the payments..." His fingers moved at lightning speed. Then he froze. His face paled. "Oh, hell." Miles leaned over. "What is it?" Felix swallowed hard. "These payments, they're coming from government sources. Holloway was in deep with someone high up." Evelyn gasped. "Are you saying this goes all the way to the top?" Felix exhaled. "I'm saying Holloway wasn't just a billionaire. He was a middleman for something way bigger than we thought." Miles clenched his fists. "That means whoever took him isn't just covering up a disappearance. They're covering up a conspiracy." Before anyone could respond, Felix's monitors flickered. The screen went black for a second, then red text flashed across it. "We warned you. Walk away." A second later, The power cut out completely. The room plunged into darkness. Miles reached for his gun. They found us. Evelyn's breath hitched. What do we do? Miles' voice was low and firm. We fight back. Chapter 10. No more running. The room was pitch black. The only sound was Evelyn's quickened breathing and the soft hum of Felix's backup power kicking in. Miles tightened his grip on his gun, his instincts screaming that they were out of time. Move, he ordered, grabbing Evelyn's arm and pulling her toward the door. Felix, grab what you can and wipe the rest. We're not leaving anything behind. Felix didn't need to be told twice. He yanked out the hard drive, stuffed a few portable disks into his jacket, and slammed a button on his desk. A second later, the monitors flickered and shut down permanently. That should fry any traceable data, Felix muttered. But it won't stop whoever's after us. A thud echoed from the hallway. Evelyn stiffened. They're already here. Miles peered through the window. 2 black SUVs had pulled up outside, men in dark suits stepping out with military precision. No badges, no hesitation, these weren't just hired thugs. They were professionals. Felix swore under his breath. This is bad. Miles shoved his gun into Evelyn's hand. Can you shoot? Her hands trembled, but she nodded. If I have to. Then let's go. They burst through the back door just as the front was kicked in. A sharp voice barked orders inside, but Miles didn't stop to listen. He led Evelyn and Felix down a narrow alley, his mind already calculating their next move. Where's the safest place to regroup? Evelyn panted. Nowhere is safe anymore, Miles replied. But I know someone who can help us disappear. They drove in tense silence, the city lights blurring past them. Miles kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting the SUVs to appear again. Felix broke the silence. I don't know if I should be impressed or terrified, but those files? They weren't just about Holloway. Miles gripped the wheel tighter. Explain. Felix hesitated. Holloway wasn't just laundering money. He was facilitating deals, illegal government contracts, weapons sales, classified operations. Stuff so deep that if it ever got out, well, let's just say presidents have been removed for less. Evelyn's face drained of color. So they killed him to keep it quiet. Felix nodded. And now they're coming for us. Miles exhaled slowly. Then we stop running. We take the fight to them. Evelyn blinked. How? We don't even know who they are. Felix smirked. Maybe not yet. But I know someone who does. Miles glanced at him. Who? Felix's grin widened. The one man they never managed to silence. Chapter 11. The Last Informant. The car rolled to a stop outside an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building looked abandoned, its rusted exterior and broken windows painting the picture of a place long forgotten. But Miles knew better. Felix turned in his seat. This guy doesn't do visitors. If he even thinks you're a threat, he'll shoot first. Miles nodded. Then let's make sure he knows we're not a threat. Evelyn glanced at him. Who exactly are we meeting? Felix smirked. An ex-NSA analyst turned whistleblower. Name's Henry Cross. He used to work deep inside government operations before he went off the grid. If anyone knows who's pulling the strings behind Holloway's disappearance, it's him. Miles took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. He led the way to the side door, knocking twice in a slow rhythm. Silence. Then, the metallic click of a rifle being cocked. Turn around and walk away, a gruff voice called from inside. Felix stepped forward. It's me, Henry. Felix Lang. We need to talk. Silence again. Then, the door creaked open just enough to reveal the barrel of a shotgun aimed directly at Felix's chest. Behind it stood an older man with sharp, calculating eyes, his salt and pepper beard adding to his hardened demeanor. You've got 10 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't put a hole in you. Miles stepped in front of Felix. Because we know what happened to Victor Holloway, and we know you do too. Henry's eyes narrowed, then after a moment, he sighed and lowered the gun. Get inside. No. Inside, the warehouse was far from abandoned. Computers lined the walls, their screens filled with scrolling code and encrypted messages. A large map was pinned to a corkboard, red strings connecting different locations like a web of conspiracy. Henry crossed his arms. "You're digging into something that can get you killed. Why should I help you?" Felix exhaled. "Because you hate these people as much as we do. And we just found proof that they were paying Holloway to cover up their operations. We need names." Henry stared at them for a long moment before walking over to his desk. He tapped a few keys, and a file appeared on the screen. Holloway wasn't just laundering money. He was erasing people, making them disappear: journalists, former operatives, political threats. And the people pulling the strings? They're higher up than you can imagine. Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "Who?" Henry turned to face them. "The Secretary of Defense. The head of National Security. Even members of the President's inner circle." Miles let out a slow breath. "So this isn't just a cover-up. It's a full-blown shadow government." Henry nodded. "And if you're smart, you'll walk away now." Evelyn clenched her fists. "That's not an option." Henry studied her, then sighed. "Then I hope you're ready. Because they'll come for you next." Chapter 12. The Trap. Miles, Evelyn, and Felix left the warehouse under the weight of what they had just learned. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous this game became. "So what's the play now?" Felix asked as they drove through the city. Miles kept his eyes on the road. "We need undeniable proof. Something that can take them down before they can take us out. And there's only one place we'll find it." Evelyn turned to him. "Where?" "Holloway's last known location. The place he disappeared from. The only place we haven't checked." Felix frowned. "His private estate? That place is crawling with security." Miles smirked. "Then we'll just have to be smarter than them." Later that night, they parked a mile away from the Holloway estate, watching from a distance. The security was tight, guards patrolling every entrance, motion detectors lining the perimeter. Evelyn sighed. "How do we get inside?" Miles pulled out a small device from his pocket. "With this. An EMP disruptor. It'll knock out the cameras and alarms for exactly 60 seconds. That's all the time we'll have to get in." Felix raised an eyebrow. "And if we get caught?" Miles smirked. "Then we're dead." Evelyn took a deep breath. "Let's do it." Miles activated the device, and the entire estate flickered into darkness. "Go," he whispered, and they sprinted toward the gates. Chapter 13. Into the Lion's Den. The darkness enveloped them as they sprinted toward the estate, the EMP device having knocked out security for just a minute. Miles led the way, his movements sharp and precise. They slipped through the gates and dashed toward the back entrance. 30 seconds left, Felix whispered, checking his watch. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, scanning the area. "Where do we go once we're inside?" "Holloway's personal study," Miles answered. "If there's anything left, it'll be there." Felix smirked. Breaking into a billionaire's private study? No big deal. The estate was eerily quiet. No alarms, no movement, just the distant hum of emergency lights flickering in the halls. Miles led them through a side corridor, avoiding the main lobby where security would be stationed once power returned. Evelyn's pulse raced. "Why does this feel too easy?" Miles frowned. "Because it is." They reached the study's entrance, a heavy mahogany door looming before them. Miles pulled out his lock-picking set and got to work, his hands moving fast. Within seconds, the lock clicked open. Felix whistled. "Remind me never to leave you near my safe." Miles smirked. "You have money to steal?" Before Felix could respond, the door creaked open, revealing the dimly lit study. Papers were scattered across the desk. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat untouched on the table. A large painting of Holloway stared down at them from above the fireplace. Evelyn stepped inside cautiously. "If someone's been here before us, they didn't clean up after themselves." Miles moved to the desk, sifting through the papers. Bank statements, offshore accounts, encrypted messages. More proof of the conspiracy. Then he saw it. A laptop, still open, with a video paused on the screen. Evelyn moved beside him. "What is it?" Miles clicked play. Holloway's face appeared on the screen, his eyes hollow, his voice urgent. "If you're watching this, I'm already dead. And you need to run. They're coming for me, just like they've come for everyone else who knew the truth. This goes deeper than you can imagine, and if you don't stop them now, no one will." Static. Then another voice, cold, calculated. "We found him. Eliminate the target." Gunfire. The screen went dark. Evelyn clamped a hand over her mouth. "Oh my God." Felix exhaled. "Well, that answers whether Holloway's alive." Miles clenched his fists. "We need to get out of here. Now." A loud click echoed from behind them. "Too late," a deep voice said. They turned slowly to find 3 armed men blocking the exit, guns pointed straight at them. Chapter 14. The Last Stand. Miles' mind raced. 3 men, heavily armed. He had his gun, but not enough ammo for a full firefight. Evelyn and Felix were unarmed, and the only exit was blocked. "Drop the weapon," one of the men ordered. Miles hesitated. He had to think fast. "Look, we can make a deal," Felix blurted out, raising his hands. "You don't need to kill us. We can disappear." The leader smirked. "You think this is a negotiation? You saw the video. That means you don't leave here alive." Evelyn's voice was steel. "Then you'll have to shoot. Because we're not going down without a fight." The man's grip tightened on his gun. That second of hesitation was all Miles needed. He lunged forward, grabbing the nearest guard's wrist and twisting hard. A gunshot rang out, missing him by inches as he wrenched the weapon away. Felix grabbed a chair and swung it at the second guard, knocking him backward. Evelyn ducked as bullets tore through the room, shattering glass and splintering wood. She crawled toward the fallen guard's weapon, her hands shaking as she grabbed it. Miles fired twice, hitting the leader in the shoulder. He stumbled, cursing, before Felix tackled him to the ground. The last remaining guard bolted for the door. "We can't let him escape," Evelyn yelled. Miles sprinted after him. The guard was fast, but Miles was faster. He caught up just as the man reached the main hallway, slamming him against the wall. "Who are you working for?" Miles demanded, pressing the gun to his temple. The guard spat blood, his eyes burning with defiance. "It doesn't matter. You're already dead." Before Miles could respond, the man bit down on something. A second later, he convulsed, foam spilling from his mouth. His body went limp. Miles swore. "A damn cyanide pill. They were never going to let us take them alive." Felix and Evelyn ran up behind him. "We need to go before more show up," Felix panted. Miles nodded. "We have what we need. Holloway's message proves everything. Now we just have to make sure the world sees it." Evelyn looked at him, determination replacing fear in her eyes. "Then let's end this." Chapter 15. The Final Move. The adrenaline still pumped through Miles' veins as they sped away from the Holloway estate. Felix gripped the laptop containing Holloway's final message like it was the most valuable thing in the world, because, right now, it was. "Where do we take this?" Evelyn asked, glancing nervously out the window for any signs of pursuit. "The press is too risky," Miles said. "Government ties run too deep. If we try to leak it through traditional media, they'll bury it before it ever reaches the public." Felix nodded. "We need something bigger. A public release they can't erase." Miles' mind raced. A live broadcast. Somewhere with millions of viewers. No chance for them to cut the feed before the damage is done. Evelyn's eyes widened. The Global Business Summit. It's tomorrow. Every major news network will be streaming it. If we can hijack their feed. Felix grinned. "Now you're thinking like a hacker." They spent the next 12 hours setting up their plan. Felix worked his magic, gaining remote access to the summit's live feed while Miles and Evelyn secured fake press credentials to gain access to the event. It was risky, but it was their only shot. The next morning, they walked into the convention center like they belonged. Security was tight, but they blended in, pretending to be part of the technical crew. "Felix, are you in?" Miles whispered through his earpiece. "Give me 30 more seconds, and done. We're patched into their live feed. Once you start the broadcast, the whole world will see it. No take-backs." Evelyn inhaled sharply. Let's do this. Chapter 16. The Truth Exposed. Miles and Evelyn positioned themselves near the main stage, where business leaders and politicians were giving carefully scripted speeches. Behind the scenes, Felix launched the pre-recorded video of Holloway's final message. Then, Miles pressed the button on his phone. The giant screens around the convention flickered, and instead of the planned presentation, Holloway's face appeared for the entire world to see. If you're watching this, I'm already dead. And you need to run. They're coming for me, just like they've come for everyone else who knew the truth. Gasps filled the auditorium. Security scrambled, trying to shut it down, but Felix had locked them out. The message played in full, exposing the secret government operations, the assassinations, the corruption at the highest levels. The moment it ended, chaos erupted. People screamed. Journalists shoved microphones at officials, demanding answers. Security forces tried to shut everything down, but the damage was done. The world had seen the truth. Miles grabbed Evelyn's hand. Time to go. They pushed through the panicked crowd, slipping out through a side exit. Felix was already waiting for them in a stolen car, grinning ear to ear. Well, that was fun, he said. But we should probably get out of town before they put a bounty on our heads. Miles smirked. Agreed. As they drove off, the city skyline glowing behind them, Evelyn exhaled, relief washing over her. Do you think it's enough? She asked. Do you think it'll stop them? Miles looked ahead, determination burning in his eyes. Maybe not. But it's a start. And sometimes, a spark is all you need to start a fire. The end.